It's a tale as old as the 1860s. Random, possibly traumatized kid gets waylaid by a strange train with crazy companions in an acid trip of a journey that encourages their emotional growth before unceremoniously dumping them back where they started. Probably with a whole bunch of new trauma to deal with. Whether the train in question is a rabbit hole, a wardrobe with lion Jesus inside, a magical tree house, or a chronically forgetful maniac programmer, this trope has been well-trodden and tracked ever since Lewis Carroll presumably dropped some acid and started wondering why the fuck time zones in the 19th century were so fucked up. Welcome to Tulip's Adventures in One Land. Now, I'm a bit late to the Infinity Train, especially where the recent seasons are concerned, and I haven't exactly watched the second half of the show, but since Season 2 was so standout, kick-ass phenomenal, I thought it'd be fun to do the first half of this little two-parter party now. After all, surely that will result in a shorter video, right? Right? So before I take my somewhat belated dive into the rest of the show, let's talk about the first two seasons. Tulip, Lake, and what the show might be trying to convey about our world, through every pocket of its own. Alright, hey, I know what you're thinking, I know I say this every time, I know it's probably starting to get old for some of you, but maybe stories just really like being about stories, because most writers aren't experts in molecular biology, okay? And maybe I like interpreting stories through the lens of stories because I'm the most English major to not pick English as their major. Sue me. Unless you're Cartoon Network and you're pissed that I'm using all this footage, in which case, please don't sue me. And yes, sometimes I've got to stretch to make a story about stories, but when character development is a foundational aspect of the setting, I feel like it shouldn't be the most difficult sell. Just because I cry wolf every time doesn't mean there isn't actually a wolf there, waiting at the end of the trail to exploit your greatest fears and psychologically ruin you lest you sacrifice your animal companion in your stead. In fact, I would say there usually is. So I propose that this series not only follows in the footsteps of such iconic otherworlds, but actively uses their premise as a vehicle, trains, to explore contemporary fiction, especially fantasy fiction, as a whole. Modern media, the internet, and storytelling is all represented by the train itself. It takes us in as passengers, robs days, months, or years of our lives, and then hopefully spits us back out a better person at the end. Although its cars are brilliant and imaginative and plentiful, just like the vast influx of fantasy fiction we've gotten over the past century or so, many of them have become numerically measurable, pumped out on schedules, arranged in 3-act structures and 23-minute episodes, our emotional growth commodified and quantified into nice bright green numbers. Not all of that is important right now, but it's going to be our framework as we move from car to car, and each book levels a more in-depth critique at this system. For now, the first season deals with Tulip, a girl going through the divorce of her parents and its shitty effects on her life and opportunities. The power of fantasy is apparent as we see the train present her with fantastical situations that push her to grow. And as she continues that journey, one that, somewhat ironically, has a lot to do with not quantifying things, appealing to science and objectivity when it comes to your own emotions, or being too single-mindedly focused on one goal, we see her confront every level of her pain. From the fun and seemingly trite to the difficult conversations she'd rather not look back on. Importantly, she doesn't quite get the typical passenger experience in every sense of the word. Tulip has to go through 5 months of filler arcs that don't reflect on the main plot at all because the conductor has been unseated. But we don't need to see the typical experience because we've already seen it. And it was called No Game No Life, Coraline, Pan's Labyrinth, or even Infinity Train's sister series, Over the Garden Wall. Now, a story's critique can typically be found codified in its antagonist, and for Book 1, that's Amelia Hughes, the conductor. At first, it seems like a pretty standard critique of fantasy, which it kind of is. Although fantasy can provide us with the tools to more intuitively confront our issues and contextualize our own lives, those tools can also be used to build worlds that let us escape from our problems, occasionally to the detriment of everyone who's trying to use those stories in a productive and self-reflective fashion. Again, it's pretty standard. If anything, fantasy's typically escapist nature is the critique most often leveled at me when I have to once again argue for its validity as important and intelligent media. The most interesting wrinkle for us here is that Amelia isn't some down-on-their-luck otaku with their head in the clouds, which is the archetype most frequently employed in this kind of discourse. She's a well-educated scientist, or at least technologian, just like Tulip. In fact, it's because she's such a good scientist and programmer that she's even able to disrupt the story like this and pursue her own desperate goals. The one who's fucking things up for everyone isn't the unemployed loser who's always been told he's nothing. Instead, it's someone who's always been told, you are the master of your own world. It bends to your will. If you can figure it out, then there's nothing you can't do. I mean, not to blast Penelope Scott in the background or anything, but,
We've been fucking mean, we're elitist, we're as flawed as any church, and this faux rad
there's a good case to be made that we see the same kind of faux rad West Coast dogma, or at least its predecessors, in the way that she immediately overtakes the train like it only belongs to her, stranding hundreds of passengers without the cars they need to get home. It also sets up another important motif that we're going to carry forwards, the train not only as media, but technology. What? A train? The most recognizable symbol of the Industrial Revolution is a metaphor for technology? Well, steal my hat and call me Terrence! Most importantly, though, the story isn't over when Tulip gets her exit like it's supposed to work. This book introduces the idea that media as represented by the train doesn't just solve problems, it creates them. Hey there, welcome to the bulk of the episode. Book 1 was fun and all, we love the characters and we love the cars, but Book 2 just takes this metaphor its predecessor set up and starts tearing into it. The train doesn't work for everyone, just like mass media, fantasy, and technology don't work for everyone, and I'm not talking about your grandpa who still doesn't know how email works. Did I say grandpa? I meant US Senator. And to understand who we are talking about, we're gonna have to talk about coding. Oh look, this train goes to game design camp after all! Coding, in the media analysis sense, not in the computer programming sense, sorry Tulip, is when a story takes a bunch of qualities that differentiate a minority group from the rest of the population and gives those qualities to a character who isn't canonically a member of that group. There's a fair bit of wiggle room for what is and isn't coding, and the term could probably use a few more subcategories. Like, sometimes the reason the character isn't canonically part of the minority is because they're a space alien and that category can't apply to them, and sometimes it's because the writers are fucking cowards. But on the whole, that's what it refers to. Like any trope, it's not good or bad, it just sort of exists. Now, to follow anything else I'm gonna say, you're gonna have to hear me out on this one. Lake is the most queer-coded NB to ever transgender. I'm gonna wake up the fucking house. To the extent that I'm going to be using they-them pronouns for them throughout the video, just like whatever absolute baller edited the wiki page just as I finished the season. While some coding is just slapping a bunch of stereotypical traits on a character design and calling it a day, other shows go the full length in terms of incorporating the themes associated with whatever those minorities are going through. And boy, howdy I tell ya, Infinity Train is one of them. I mean, first of all, they're literally escaping from a world which reinforces a binary and tells them that they have to conform to a life of a girl. Well, I mean, it's a specific girl, but still. The first thing they do when they have that realization and escape the world is pierce their ears, start dressing in masculine clothes, and schedule a visit with the most life-threatening barber since Sweeney Todd. I mean, does this not look like a non-binary transformation to you? Oh, and also, whenever they look in the mirror, they see a representation of everything they're trying to escape as the voice of society comes out to harass them personally and totally ruin their day. Dysphoria ain't just one bitch, it's two! And they're armed with, well, whatever that is, it ain't good. Of course, that's not the extent of their coding. Characters with different skin tones have been racially coded since the dawn of friggin' racism, and that's only more apparent when you're running from homicidal law enforcement. But it's still a solid foundation for understanding the metaphor. Heck, they even name themselves after the first noun they see, and if that ain't a non-binary mood, I don't know what the fuck is. Hey, by the way, do you think that behavior is like a trauma response, like collectively within our community? No? I mean, it's not like we were constantly dehumanized at best and demonized at worst by even the most well-meaning of showrunners and creative types across all the media we consumed as children or anything. Right? Right? Hey, so what if our high school twink of a main character liked guys instead of girls? Or what if this character's gender was more ambiguous, using multiple sets of pronouns? You're just going to confuse kids with that nonsense. They're not smart enough to get any of this crap. Now just write your jokes about girls being inferior and stop getting so political on us, yeah? What if we changed this character's race in our adaptation? What if we kept this character's race in our adaptation? I see what you're saying, but at the end of the day, we're not here to start a revolution. We're here to sell Omnitrix toys to a bunch of kids. And you know which parents can afford it? White parents. Kids can't empathize with protagonists who don't look like them, dumbass. They're just not gonna buy it. Can we not involve our character in a subplot which ties them to heterosexuality? Like, just once? We wish you luck in your search for a new occupation. Disney really let Gravity Falls get away with this, but feared the backlash that would come from Dollar Store Cupid making two old ladies fall in love, and that was in 2014! See, consciously or not, over decades and decades of this halfway representation, the media paints a consistent picture. Autistic and aromantic people are robots, black people are aliens, and non-binary people are shape-shifting tricksters. Eventually it just starts copying itself and we're stuck with a whole coded culture where this is the norm. No, mass media does not literally create non-binary or neurodivergent people. We've always existed. But the train has made such a large portion of those people in those communities and under those labels identify as non-human that it kind of has created us as we currently exist. Heck, Heck, most of us retreat further into media than the average person because the real world makes it very, very clear that we're not wanted here. In a shocking turn of events, I couldn't find a reputable psych study that asked random participants to rate how much they identify as human, which is odd, because in the circles I frequent, it's a pretty common sentiment. And in case it wasn't obvious, I don't condemn anyone who identifies more with fairies, fiends, or furries than humans. Because at the end of the day, I am an interdimensional being of pure energy, so, we do what we gotta do, right? So what's the problem then? Can't we just say, fuck humanity, we're gonna make our own humanity with wings and cat ears? Well, whether they are the actual minority in question or just are coded to look that way, what exactly does our media tell us by the way it treats characters associated with those groups? Oh, you silly goose. You aren't gonna get rewarded for emotional development. You get killed first in a horror movie, or you get to be the antagonist. You get to be the tool in our script, the loose bunch of stereotypes played for laughs at your expense. Look at that demon. You could tell it's xenofiction because it doesn't even understand romance. Wow, what a fucking freak, right? Whether it's actual representation or coded representation, the train that is our hopes and dreams and TikTok feed isn't optimized to help us exist in the world and feel more like ourselves. It's only optimized to help the ones who fall into its narrow definition of human. Identifying with supernatural creatures is okay, because they're still people, just people who work a little differently. The problem comes when the media we consume starts to forget about that little tidbit. When the world forgets to give us a number. As the infinite train of technology chugs along, see what I did there? Our world gets more quantified, because as it turns out, that's hella convenient for enormous systemized societies. You can just plug them into a computer and start deciding things like, I don't know, how many people get to eat today? Numbers, whether it's your wage, your height, your credit score, or your subscriber count, start to be how society sees you. This applies to media even more so. That there TV show had better fit a 23-minute time frame. Why? Well, with the old new donut hula, you can poke not 1, but 2 ad breaks. You get greenlit for X amount of seasons and Y number of episodes, and if your show becomes unmarketable and doesn't sell enough toys, then we're wheeling that shit regardless of quality. I'm not bitter. So when we think about Lake's struggle for a number this season, what are we talking about? Well, take a look at this scene.
Why didn't we get the same points?
Passengers get preferential treatment because they have a greater need to exit the car.
Passengers get preferential treatment by the train. It streamlines some stories to their conclusion, but impedes others despite any merit-based measurement. I'm still having trouble connecting it back to, our real world and stuff. So if there was, a way we could clarify that...
Oh, look! You've got co-star billing now!
But you'll probably be paid less because Hollywood breeds gender inequality.
Way to say the quiet part out loud, sad one. And I know it's just a throwaway line alongside such gems as,
Found your shoes, and now I'm a shoehead! Who's a shoehead? Shoehead! That's who!
But given that it said, as Lake is pleading for equal treatment, it kinda sticks out in your head, doesn't it? Being, a critique of this very same inequity in none other than the entertainment industry, where the train acts as a meta-narrative stand-in. The strength of fantasy is that it can make abstract concepts visible to us so that we can address them. And in this case, the number is a very simple representation of privilege. We see the same preferential treatment play out in a billion different ways throughout society. Black people are more likely to get harsher sentences for comparable crimes. And even my personal pick for the most detestable fake university has to agree that there's about a 6.6% wage gap that can't be explained as anything other than gender-based discrimination. But while privilege is like a systemic ideological issue in our media and our numerical society, at least it's not, built into our tools like it is on the train. Right? Right? Oh, god damn it, guys. Remember when I said the train also stands in for technology? Now, how exactly do I say that? Technology is racist. Surprise, surprise. Sure, we tend to think of computers as the ultimate arbiters of objectivity, all calculating and infallible and absolute, but I implore anyone who thinks that to take a look at the floor, directly beneath one of those automatic soap dispensers in public restrooms. We all know the way it just stares you down with that unwavering red eye as you do the goddamn hokey-pokey trying to get it to work, and then maliciously waits for the moment your hand is furthest from the target point to blow its load all over the floor. Now, would it surprise you to learn that that happens more often to people with darker skin? It shouldn't. Black people also tend not to render as well in photographs, tend not to get picked up by face or expression recognition, tend to glitch the fuck out with Snapchat filters. What's the deal here? Well, of course, what's really going on is that the Ku Klux coding camp is sending its members behind the scenes to sabotage all of technology in the name of white supremacy. Also, every individual white person is evil, I want a $500 minimum wage, and we should be murdering babies. Thanks, Ben Shapiro's liberal straw man. Okay, back in the box. Now, contrary to the beliefs of the nobody who thinks that and all of the pseudo-intellectual bullies who think that they do, racism doesn't have to be on purpose. After all, Benadryl, you made this definitely racist tweet, which you kind of apologized for, and you're supposed to be colorblind. The people who made those devices just forgot to test them on dark skin when they were calibrated. Just like the train stopped giving a shit about what happened to Lake as soon as there was no one with a number involved. This is particularly problematic because it turns out humanity is just a bunch of copycats. All of our technology is based on our previous technology. New technological innovations like the filter that turns your nostrils into your eyes rely on older ones like facial recognition, cameras, computers, and fire. As the train keeps on clickety-clacking on the capital path and technology becomes more and more widespread, society locks in and quantifies systems of categorization that are created without everyone's interest in mind. Try being an unmedicated ADHD kid in public school, or, God forbid, the job market. Measuring productivity in time, of all things? Is this some sort of sick joke? If you come near me with that planner, I will mark it with the day of your death and then instantly forget about that. And don't even get me started on IQ tests. Intelligence doesn't exist, you sons of bitch! And even more problems start rearing their squiggly line marked heads when people start looking at the numbers as an indicator of personhood. But I'm sure we'll get into that next season. For now, let's just take a look at how Book 2 actually handles all these themes, because as we all know, just because you address something in a story doesn't mean you actually did it well. Isn't that bright? So, where does Book 2 sit on the Potter to Pale scale? The top of it, pretty much. Like, not quite, but like pretty much. Lake's struggle is always portrayed as punching up, as a justifiable response to this system of oppression. In media nowadays, there's a bit of a tendency to portray people who are fighting for their right to exist as having gone too far, and then give them gruesome endings while literal fascists get off with a slap on the wrist. Just to give an example, I'm gonna spoil Falcon and the Winter Soldier for a sec here. Carly and the Flag Smashers, which is a punk band I would definitely listen to, all just fucking die at the end because Marvel didn't want to deal with them and they went too far. Even though the story fails to provide any other way they could have achieved their goal of avoiding mass deportation and displacement. Meanwhile, John Walker, same guy who murdered a surrendering opponent in a very clear parallel to the racially charged themes of the show, gets his fucking hero moment in the last episode by saving this van full of terrible people. Look, I'm not saying it's not realistic that he gets to just walk away scot-free from his war crimes, but could you at least have the decency to portray it as a bad thing? Anyhow, spoilers over, Infinity Train does the exact opposite. Lake is criminalized for not fitting in the status quo, but whether they deserve that criminalization is never even a question. And while they do have actual flaws in a character arc throughout the show, unlike, say, Captain Marvel, not taking shit from fascists clearly ain't one of them. Even when Lake is screaming that they're a person and breaking stuff in something that could be called a riot, again, it's not demonized. The biggest consequence of this is that it gets the attention of someone who can change things, which is, you know, the entire fucking point of protests. Yeah, it throws everything into wild disarray, but that's because the two brain cells that we put in charge of society literally cannot compute the idea of Lake being a person. In an age where Marvel Studios is making military propaganda and Star Wars is deciding neo-Nazis are redeemable after one conversation, I mean, Kylo, he was having a really bad day. Leaders of fascist regimes, they just have it really hard, and I don't think that a lot of people get that. So I think that that's where a lot of the animosity is coming from. This is obviously someone whose legacy should be respected, and it's really freaking refreshing to see this quirky Cartoon Network piece justify the murder of two cops in self-defense. This show really said, good cops? Well sure, when there are people with privilege around. I'd say ACAB, but fuck the flex just rolls off the tongue so much better. Infinity Train is a beautiful, vibrant story with the potential for 10, 12, even 4 seasons if you really wanted to stifle it for no fucking reason. And while it's definitely not always a one-to-one allegory for our world, through the creative use of fantasy, it can still give 13 to 40-year-olds everywhere a better understanding of privilege than this 58-year-old man with a degree in psychology. But even more importantly, Infinity Train gives us a place in its story. It tells all the stuffed animals and sentient liquids, carrot people and corgi monarchs, caterpillarists and masochistic toads that we are people. That we matter. That our ways of life are valid, and that the story isn't over just because some cis guy got their happy ending. So yeah, fuck humans and all your human names, because this person who's just been told over and over again that they're just the mirror tulip names themselves Lake. A mirror just reflects things. That's its purpose. It's a tool people use to see themselves, to get that booger way up in their nose, or to get over their lizard dying. But a lake? A lake is its own entity with life, energy, an ecosystem that exists whether humans do or not. It just also happens to reflect things. I'm J-Maniac, and I'm ready for Season 3 to turn my heart into a rusty stain on the tracks. Because something we can't forget is that the show's not over. One instance of justice, no matter how victorious, isn't enough when the system itself is geared against you. If you want to hear about more modern reinterpretations of the Wonderland-esque, start reading Wild Bow's Pale now, and you just might be done by the time I make a video about it. In the meantime, fuck the flex, keep the fight going, and I wish you luck in the next car.